Welcome to Anita Talks History and Genealogy. So glad that you all could join us. And the topic today has to do with the Racial Integrity Act and how Virginia used the reclassification of Native peoples in order to get control of their land, to take their rights away. And before we start, let's get you guys to subscribe, to like us, to share this channel, and also to comment. Any questions that you have, feel free to ask them, and we'll get back to you with responses. And also, we are. This is a genealogy and a history channel, and I'm coming from my historical perspective from the research and the documentation that I did on my family and the surrounding communities of where they were, where they lived. Primarily, they were Native peoples here in these United States, and they were, like many natives, they were mixed with Europeans, and they were mixed with African people. But come to find out that some of those people that I thought were African did not come from Africa. They came from South America, and they were indigenous to South America, and they were brought here as slaves from South America. The reason being that they were doing that with natives early on. When Columbus came and he saw the natives and they welcomed them, those people coming off the ship that smelled so bad, that were diseased, they helped them to stay alive, to survive the diseases. And Columbus spoke about how welcoming they were and what a wonderful people they were, and how they had all this food, they had this beautiful land that they lived on, and they had gold. And the other action that they took was to enslave those Native people. So when they enslaved those Native people, they just did not just keep them there, they moved them around. They moved them. Some of them were brought up here as slaves. Some of them were even sent to Africa. You don't believe me? I was told that when I was in Cuba, that some of the Arawaks were sold as slaves to Africa, not by Africans, by Europeans, okay? And so I'm talking today from the perspective of this book, one of my books, Along the Rappahannock. And this book is about a Native tribe that my ancestors, those natives were my ancestors. And they were the Nanzadigal Indians living on the Rappahannock. They were the original Rappahannock Indians. And they lived in what is now called King George and Caroline County, on both sides of the Rappahannock. And so the reason that I'm bringing them up is to say that in 1924 there was a Racial Integrity Act by Walter Plecker. But what I want folks to understand is that before Walter Plecker, there was Racial Integrity Acts. There were laws being passed by the colonizers to redesignate Indians as mulatto, colored, Negro, or black. And also, in 1692, Maryland, the state of Maryland, was redesignating people as mulatto, Native people as mulatto, colored, Indian, the same thing. These were if you look in, there's some law books called Headings, Statutes at Large, and those are the books that have the laws that were being passed prior to even the Revolutionary War. Almost, I mean, I'm not going to say as soon as they came, but not that long after they came as visitors here to the Americas. They began moving in and changing the laws to suit themselves, to put themselves over the indigenous people of these lands. Imagine how much, how, I don't know, how arrogant you have to be to think that you should be over lands that Creator gave to the people he wanted on those lands. You disrupted creation. They, disrupted creation by bringing themselves and their people to indigenous people's lands and setting themselves up as some kind of gods or God's people. Like they say, oh, Jewish people are God's chosen. No, they don't. They are not. They believe these Europeans believe they are God's chosen people. Because, they're not going to say no Semitic people are God's chosen people. I mean, if they're going to lie themselves into a superior position. That they were, God told them to rule over this earth. I don't know what God they're talking to, because I've never heard the voice of that God. Okay? Anyway, that's my opinion. And so, the Nanzadigo, who were the original Rappahannocs, came under scrutiny because there were some people found deceased on their land. This white family had moved on that land, and they had two children, or they had children, I think it was two, and they were found dead. So they accused the Nanzadigo, but because the Nanzadigo had been telling that colonial government that your people are encroaching on our land, and please do something. If they were going to kill them, why would they go and ask the colonial government to take these people off their land? So when they were found dead, and by the way, they're out in the woods, probably living in a shack, and there's bears, there's all kind of predators in those woods that could have got to those people. In fact, it wouldn't be beyond the pale that the colonial government itself didn't have those people killed. But they blamed it on the Nanzadigo. And I'm saying that there was no fair trial. There was really no investigation. All it was a push to get these people off their land. And so they redesignated the adults over 12. They said that the adults, anybody over 12 was an adult, and they sold them as slaves to Antigua. So they went there not as native slaves. They went there as mulattoes, because the state of Virginia passed a law stating that the children who were 12 and under of the tribal members were redesignated as mulatto, colored, Negro, or black. So they racially redesignated them, the children. And those children were put into indentures of 25 years. And those children were forbidden by law to return to their ancestral lands. Remember, they were on the Rappahannock. They were the original Rappahannock tribes. on both sides, what is now King and George County and Caroline County. And so that was in 1704. Maryland's was in 1692, and that was way before Plecker. And Plecker probably used some of those laws when he began going around and redesignated people who were indigenous, who knew their tribes, by the way. The people in Virginia that Plecker was targeting, he was saying, oh, these people are not Indians, and they are not white. You know, some of them are trying to pass for white, but they're actually from Negroes, or either they're Melungeons or something like that. This is what Plecker did. He went in the records, and anyone who said they were native, he redesignated them as mulatto, colored. I think he was redesignated more as colored than mulatto. But what he was saying was that they just don't want to be Negro. So he used his pen to make sure that they were redesignated as Negro. And here's something that I have on Plecker, because he was a real piece of work. He said that they just want to be better. They just want to be, and we won't let them be Indian. Well, because if you're Indian, you have some rights to the land. And the whole point of them making sure that you don't say that is that you don't have no rights to the land, because the only people that should have rights to the land are Europeans, wherever they go, and not just in the Americas. In Australia, they're the only ones talking about Australia's a white country. And some of these politicians now are trying to say America is a white country. Wherever they go, they try to make themselves the indigenous people to those lands by killing off white people. Dr. Walter Plecker was appointed in 1918 as the director of the Bureau of Vital Statistics, and made it one of his primary motives to show that anyone who tried to say that they were Indian was merely a mongrel or a colored part person who was trying to become white by virtue of declaring themselves to be Indian. So when did they accept Indians as whites? Plecker changed records of Virginia Indians that were recorded as Indian to say that they were colored. He did this on birth certificates, marriage certificates, on death certificates, on any legal records that he could get his hands on. To solidify its tribal government and fight for state recognition, the Rappahannock tribe incorporated in 1921. But like other Virginia Indian groups, the tribe struggled to preserve its identity and culture early in the 20th century. The Racial Integrity Act of 1924 and subsequent legislation banned interracial marriage in Virginia and asked for voluntary racial identification on birth and marriage certificates. White was defined as having no trace of African ancestry, while all other people, including Indians, were defined as colored. To accommodate elite Virginians who had claimed Pocahontas and John Rolfe as ancestors, the law allowed for those who had 1/16 or less of the blood of the American Indian and have no other non-Caucasian blood to be deemed to be white persons. The laws essentially erased Virginia Indians as a category of people under the law. The U.S. Supreme Court declared the Racial Integrity Act unconstitutional in Loving versus Virginia in 1967. However, Plecker was not the first one to change the racial status of natives. In the October 1705 Acts of Assembly, handing statutes at large, the following change was made. Definition of a mulatto: the child of an Indian, the child, grandchild, or great grandchild of a Negro. So you can see it's in their laws. And this is what I found when I was researching my ancestors in Virginia, that those, and not only in Virginia, because I was born and raised in Pennsylvania, it was the same in Pennsylvania. I can go back and there are records where my ancestors are mulatto, colored, Negro, black, all within their lifetime. It's that when they're controlling the Department of Vital Statistics, they can classify you any way they want to. It's only lately that, they have said, how do you identify yourself? But back then, it was they, mostly white, white folks, was going out doing the census, mostly white males. They looked at you and they decided what race you were. So I have an ancestor who was Raleigh Penn, who was in Amherst County, and he owned property with his wife, Sarah Evans Penn, and he was designated as white. And a tax, they I think it was 1783, because he owned land and stuff. So they went up there and they saw him and they said, oh, he's white. So, but the next time they came back, they saw mulattoes there, or they saw him, they may have come in the summertime, and they said, no, he's a mulatto. So he's designated white at one point, and then they come back, and then they said he had mulattoes in his house, so they said he was a mulatto. He had mulattoes in his house, but they were not, even though, they meticulously kept records. Raleigh was in the Revolutionary War, and he was identified as a mulatto, and in fact, his entire unit that they were a part of were identified as mulatto. They would not identify them as Indian, although they knew the tribe that they came from. Raleigh knew, that he was from Indiantown in Lancaster County, Virginia. He knew it. And most of the natives, even in 1924, they knew what tribe they came from. They were not just saying, oh, I'm Indian. They could prove their lineage. And Plecker was rewriting history just like they do. Just like now with the current administration, how they're rewriting history. They're going and throwing out any books that teach about history, about Native history, about who the Indians were, that they weren't Indians. They identified themselves by the tribes they belonged to, and so even when they started bringing Africans over here, they would identify themselves as the tribes that they came from. They did not call themselves African. That's a continent. That's not a country. They came from all kinds of different tribes. Just like America is a continent. It's not a country. There's so-called South America. There's Brazil. There's all Colombia and all the different countries in South America, Venezuela, and Mexico is actually a part of America, of the United States. They just California, Utah, let's name them, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, That's Mexico. Mexico is actually a part of these so-called United States. It was they they took the territory from the original indigenous people of that land. That's what they do. I'm sorry. I guess truth hurts, but that's what they've been doing. Nobody was giving it to them. How could Native Americans give you land? They did not read or write or speak English. You know, half of the people that came over here from Europe did not read or write or speak English. I mean, they spoke English. Let me correct that, but they were illiterate too. They were illiterate, and you know, but they would put something in front of the natives that were written by the so-called leaders, the ones who were educated, the few who were, and tell them, oh, put your X on it. Do you think the natives were putting their X on it? How do you know? Because the witnesses were the colonizers. And oh, they gave us the land. They sat and told a lie to get the land from the natives. When that didn't work, they set up their own laws and wrote the laws so that they could push the indigenous people off their land. That's their whole thing, is stealing people's land and getting the people to worship and praise them for their acts. So you want me to worship and praise you when you're a thief and you're a liar, and your laws don't even apply to you. They only apply to the people that you want to be under your control, or under those false laws that you're passing. And we know that that they change the laws to suit themselves. That's what's going on right now. None of those laws that are on the books apply to them. They only apply to us so-called black and brown and indigenous people of these lands. You know? And so that Racial Integrity Act of 1924, that was just a follow-up to what they were doing. They did the same thing in Pennsylvania, throughout the colonies. They redesignated us off of our land. They redesignated our ancestors off of our land, and then get upset when we claim that that's our land. They don't even want us to say it. Just like they don't want us to say reparations. They don't even want us to have the right to say it. Not that they're going to do the right thing, you know, these so-called Christians, but they don't even want us to say it, to speak about it amongst ourselves. Because then that makes them look like the perpetrators, and they want to look like the victims. You know? And so, you know, so today we're honoring the ancestors who fought so hard, who honored the land, who had fresh water, who had fresh air, who had plenty of, you know, healthy foods to eat, who could walk around and not be terrorized, who lived in peace. And in so much peace, you know, it's like living in paradise, that you think everybody else is living like that. You don't think a monster is going to pull up on shore and take what was given to you by Creator, because those monsters were not blessed with what our ancestors were blessed with. So instead of them coming and, you know, just being on the land that was offered to them, well, there's land over there. Nobody, you know, you can have that land. They wanted all of it. They want all of it. And then when they get all of it, they're still miserable. They're still angry. They're still out here killing not only us, but each other. Because there's a spiritual conflict when people do that kind of stuff within themselves. They're warring with themselves. And we have to recognize that and understand. And we have to search for our own truths. They're not going to tell us the truth. It's not in them to do that. And, you know, take from that what you will. But check out my book, Along the Rappahannock, and it talks about those racial integrity acts. And there's a lot of information about Walter Plecker, but there's also a lot of information about hanging statutes at large. That's what they were using prior to the Revolutionary War. And those laws were church laws. They were based on the Anglican Church and the Church of England. So they were, during that period, when they were colonizing us and they set them churches up, the church warden is the one that would come out and arrest and harass and enslave the native people. And they were also in charge of the slaves. The church was behind the colonization of our lands, the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, and the Episcopalian Church. And so all these other churches that come, that are part of them, followed suit. And why they don't want us to talk about it, God knows what they did. That's who they should be concerned about, since they're so Christian. If you're a Christian, you should be concerned more about what God or your Creator is seeing you do than with what I am talking about here on my channel. I want to thank you all for coming and sitting with me, and I'll be back shortly, and you all have a nice day.